Hi and welcome to another lesson. I am Habib and I am an ICT tutor. So in today's lesson we are going to be learning about what are relative cell references, what are absolute cell references, and what is the difference between them. So here we are. Let's go ahead and let's have a look at today's questions. So we have three questions. The first one is asking us to calculate the liters of petrol required for each journey and apply two decimal places. Calculate the cost of the journey to each of the destinations and apply two decimal places. Calculate the percentage cost that each journey is of the total cost and apply one decimal place. Before we start answering these questions, the first thing we're going to tackle and understand is what is a relative cell reference. So to understand this, we are going to be using a different spreadsheet. So I'm just going to take you over there. We're going to use this one which we created earlier in one of the very earlier lessons called Ski Budget 4. Now I'm going to work out the total sales made for these items. So we sold tickets, the price is 99 for this airfare, and we have quantity is 1. So it's a simple multiplication formula. I'm going to go straight into it. So equals unit cost C3 multiplied by the number, press enter, and we get £99. So straightforward multiplication formula. Now the question of a relative reference or an absolute reference only comes into question if and only when we are replicating an existing formula. Whether it's a formula or a function, when we replicate from one cell into other cells, this is when we need to decide whether the cells in the formula needs to be a relative reference or an absolute reference. So before we get into all of that, let's understand what a relative reference is. In this example that I have just created, this multiplication formula, if I was to replicate all the way down for the rest of the items, it works beautifully, perfectly. There's no mistakes at all. If I scroll down each one, you can see it's using C4 multiplied by D4, then it goes to C5, then it goes to C6, C7, C8, and C9. It follows to the next cell references for each of the row automatically. Now, this never probably came to your mind as a question as to why does it do that? Well, the thing about a relative cell reference is that Excel is automatically programmed to have every cell in a formula to be this relative reference, which basically means if I was to replicate my answer from one cell, so for example, to get this answer here, Excel used these two cells here on the left hand side. Now if I copy or replicate this cell, this answer formula into the next one, I'm just going to delete these, it'll be a better example. So if I replicate from this cell into this one, which I'm going down by 1, what Excel will do, it will use, and also instead of using these two cells, it will also come down by 1. So let's have a quick look. So there we are. So it's using C4 by D4, which is them two. If I again replicate into another cell, so if I go down by 1, Excel will also ask these cells, so instead of using them, to also go down by 1 to be used in this cell. So if I go down by one cell, Excel also tells or uses the cells that I'm going to multiply also by one row down. So if I go one row down here, Excel uses them. If I go down by another row, Excel is going to use these two cells. So this is what we call a relative cell reference. It uses the correct cells automatically because that's the default setting in Excel, to use relative references instead of what we call something an absolute cell reference, which we will discuss in a minute. So if I go down by another one, it's going to use these two. So basically, if I'm going down by one, Excel will also automatically go down by one row. So this is what we mean by a relative cell reference. So if you bear that in mind when I'm explaining to you what an absolute cell reference is in a minute, then you will understand it even better. Now we are back on the destination spreadsheets on the mileage worksheet. We'll be using this one to answer these three questions. The first one was to calculate the liters of petrol required for each journey. Now these three questions will give you plenty of opportunity to practice and use absolute cell references in formulas, so you understand it fully, because I have explained absolute cell references in lesson 29, but I wanted to create this lesson to explain it further, because absolute cell references are one of those things that you may not get it straight away. So it requires a bit of practice. So I thought this lovely lesson will give you ample opportunity to practice absolute cell references and also understand what relative cell references are. So for us to work out the liters of petrol, all we have to do is divide the distance by miles per liter. So I'm going to put equals and then B3 divide by miles per liter, because every mile is I'm going to be using 8 liters. So 44 divided by 8 will give me the answer. So divide by D24, so B3 divided by D24, press enter, and I get 5.5 liters. If you do have any doubts, please grab a calculator and punch in 44 divided by 8. You will get 5.5. It's a simple division formula. Now, just like before, I'm going to replicate this and see what happens. See if it works. Okay, it doesn't. The second cell, okay, we've got a number, but that number cannot be correct because I cannot be using 55 liters just for doing 72 miles. That cannot be correct. So let's see what went wrong. So in the first cell is B3 divided by D24. In the second one is B4 divided by D25. Now D25 is this cell here, which is price per liter, but we should have been using miles per liter. So because in Excel, like I said earlier, these cells by default are relative references, which means if I go down by one cell, if I replicate into one cell down, Excel automatically moves one cell down. So for example, this point is very important, so please bear with me and listen to it very carefully. So from here, if I'm using B3, when I replicate, Excel will use B4. And for the second part, for the first one, if I'm using D24 and I replicate into the second one, Excel will automatically use D25. So it increases by one cell down because I'm replicating by one cell down. So I repeat, If I replicate into the next one, Excel will change to B4 and this one will change to D25. Naturally, if I replicate one more, Excel will change this one to B5 and this will change to D26. Let's have a look. There you go. So B5 and D26. Now in D26, which is this cell here, there's nothing in there. It's blank. And because it's blank, we've got all these errors. So somehow we need to, because we are using miles per liter to work out all these answers here, the liters of petrol for each one of these destinations, we have to somehow fix or freeze this cell here. We want this one to change as we replicate, from B5, B6, B7 and so on. But D, if I take you right to the top, it should have been the original one, D24. We do not want D24 to change. So D24 needs to remain static. It needs to be constant, it needs to be frozen, whatever word you want to use. But it should not change as I replicate. Now, the opposite of relative reference is absolute reference. So if B3 we want it to change, and this is what we call a relative reference, the opposite is absolute. So D24, we need to make this an absolute reference. Now, to make it an absolute reference, all you do is type in a $sign before the column D and a $sign before the row number 24, like so. And just by doing that, you have made D24 in this formula to be an absolute reference. So if I was to replicate it now, this D24 in the formula will not change. Let's have a look. So I go to the top one again where I did my original division formula, and I'm going to use the fill handle at the bottom here and click and drag and replicate into the other cells, and let's see what happens. Okay, that looks a lot better. At least we've got some numbers. Let's see if they are correct. Please keep an eye on the formula bar. I'm just going to scroll down each one and let's see if B3 should change. B4, good. Is D24 changed? No, it hasn't, so that's correct. I'm going to scroll down the rest. So B5, B6, but D24 is not changing. Can you see? That's great. So this has worked. It has worked because we have made D24 an absolute reference, because D24, which is the miles per liter, is being used for every single one of these destinations to work out the liters of petrol. So we want the distance to change for each one, which is this reference here, B14, column B. So these are changing, which we need to. So this is a relative reference. And remember, I said relative references changes as I replicate one down. Relative references also changes by one down. But the second part here, we did not want it to change. So this has remained constant, D24. We've made it absolute by using the $sign. So that's brilliant. I just need to change this to 2 decimal places. I'm just going to use the increased decimal places here this time. The next question is to work out the cost. The cost. So to work out the cost, all we have to do is multiply the liters of petrol used for each destination by the price per liter. So in other words, 5.5 multiplied by 1.29 to get the cost for each of these destinations. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and type that in, equals D3, which is the liters of petrol we have used to go to Leeds, multiplied by the price per liter, which is 1.29. So this cell is D25, and simply press enter. Now I'm going to replicate. These are relative or absolute? Relative or absolute? They are relative because there's no $sign. So if I replicate, do you think it's gonna work? Let's have a look. Okay, it's giving me 0, so it hasn't worked because as I replicated, it started using the cells under 1.29, and these are all empty. So you can't multiply something against 0. You'll always get 0. So it hasn't worked. The reason it hasn't worked, you probably guessed, is because I haven't made D25 an absolute reference, because D25 in this formula, to work out the cost for every single destination, we are using price per liter. So D25, which is the price per liter, needs to be constant. We need to freeze this. Now again, to freeze this, we just type in the $ before the column D and the $ before the row 25, press enter. Now let's have a quick look. So you can see there D3, we haven't used any $, so this is a relative reference, which means it will change to D4, then D5, then D6, etc. But this one is an absolute reference, so this one will not change, and it shouldn't, because we are using this cell to work out the cost for every single destination here. So I'm going to replicate and let's see if it works. There we are. It's working. Again, I'm just going to change this to 2 decimal places. There we are. So again, if I just quickly scroll down, if you keep an eye on the formula bar, just to see that the first cell D4, D5 is all changing all the way down, but the second part D25 is not changing. Can you see? You need to pay attention here. This is not changing, so it has worked brilliantly. Fantastic. Okay, finally we're going to work out the percentage cost. To work out the percentage cost, all we have to do is divide the individual cost by the total cost to work out the percentage. So again, it's a simple division formula. So start with equals cost for leads, which is E3, divided by the total cost, which is here at the bottom, E22. Press enter and we get a fraction. Now the question was asking us to change this into a percentage with 1 decimal place. So I'm just going to do this by opening the number group, select percentage and 1 decimal place. You can see in the sample this is what it's going to look like. Happy with that, click on OK and we get 1%. Now again, I'm going to replicate. I hear you telling me not to because I haven't made something absolute. Do you think I should make anything absolute here? E3 or E22? Which one do you think? E3 or E22? Should E3 change as I replicate down, because this is the cost of individual individual destinations. So these should change. So E3 should remain a relative reference. But what about E22? Because E22 is the total. Am I using in this formula this total cell for each one of these calculations? Yes, I am. So because of that, we need to again freeze E22. We need to make this an absolute reference. So this time, instead of typing it in, I'm going to show you a quicker way using a function key, which will save you a lot of time. So you can use F4, which is one of the function keys which is located at the top of your keyboard. So simply all you have to do is in the formula bar where you've typed in E22, you just click anywhere near E22 and press F4, and what it will do is automatically put in the $ for you. It just saves you a bit of time, just a quick shortcut if you like. Once you've done that, you press enter and there's your final formula, which is correct now because E3 is a relative reference and E22 is now an absolute reference because we do not want E22 to change. So now if we replicate all the way down, let's see what happens. There we are. So now we have worked out the individual percentage cost for each one of these destinations. So £7.10 is 1% out of the total cost, and so on. So each one of these three examples that we have used, liters of petrol, cost and percentage cost, for each one of them we had to use an absolute reference for the second part or the second cell reference in our formula, because we wanted this to remain constant and not to change as we replicated down. So I hope this lesson gave you a good insight of when to use a relative reference and when to use an absolute reference. Just bear in mind that by default Excel does use relative references. So most of the time when you're replicating, it works out perfectly fine because Excel is programmed to use relative references, so it does work. But if it doesn't and you're getting something wrong, just ask yourself, do you need to use an absolute cell reference? Now, just a quick recap before we finish. We use relative references when we need the cells to change as we replicate down. If we don't want a particular cell reference, such as E22 to change in a formula, we need to use an absolute reference. Now, to make an absolute reference in the formula bar, all you have to do is just press F4, but make sure you click anywhere near the cell first of all, and then press F4 on the keyboard, and it will turn it into an absolute reference by putting in the dollar signs for you automatically. So that is the end of this lesson. I hope you've understood the differences between a relative reference and absolute reference. If you haven't and you need any more clarification, please leave me a comment or a question in the comment section, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And this brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned a lot about relative and absolute cell references. If you have, please kindly like and share and subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already. Until then, you take care, and I shall see you over in the next lesson. Goodbye for now.